The music hall stood at the edge of the town like a forgotten memory. Its tall windows carried dust, and its wooden doors creaked whenever someone entered. Most evenings, no one came inside. It was a quiet place, half abandoned, except for one person, Elena. Elena was a young woman with soft brown hair and tired eyes that often carried a sadness she never spoke about. She had no family nearby, no friends who stayed long, and no one waiting for her at home. Her life was simple. She worked at a small bookstore in the mornings and returned to her little apartment in the evenings. But the silence of her rooms was heavy, and she could not bear it. That was why she came to the old music hall. Inside the hall, against the stage wall, sat a black piano. Its surface had scratches and its keys had yellowed with time, yet the sound that came from it was still rich, deep, and alive. Elena sat before it every night after work, her fingers moving carefully over the keys. She did not play for an audience. She played for herself, and perhaps, for the silence that always threatened to swallow her. Her music was not always cheerful. Most of the time, the melodies carried a quiet sadness, like raindrops falling on a lonely street. But in that sadness, Elena found comfort. She told herself that as long as the piano was there, she was not truly alone. There was one melody she returned to again and again. She did not know its name, nor had she ever learned it from anyone. It came to her naturally, as if it had lived in her heart for years. The tune was beautiful, yet incomplete. Whenever she played it, she always reached a point where the next note seemed hidden from her, just out of reach. Still, she played it every night, letting the unfinished song echo through the empty hall. She often closed her eyes as she played, imagining what it would feel like if someone were there to listen. She imagined a person sitting in the front row, smiling gently, and nodding as if to say, "I hear you, I understand." But when she opened her eyes, the seats were always empty, and the only sound was the fading whisper of the keys. Yet Elena never stopped. The piano had become her only companion, and she spoke through it in ways she could never speak aloud. But what she did not know was that she was not always alone. Hidden in the shadows at the back of the hall, a man sometimes sat silently, listening. His name was Adrian Hale. To the outside world, Adrian was known as a billionaire businessman, a man who had built his empire from nothing and now lived in wealth and power. But to himself, he was a man broken by loss. His wife, the love of his life, had died years ago in an accident that left him hollow. Since then, he had closed himself off from the world, living behind walls of money and silence. And yet, when he heard Elena's piano for the first time, something stirred in him. He had come to the hall one night, wandering the city aimlessly, and the music drew him in like a flame. When he sat in the shadows and listened, his heart nearly stopped. The melody she played, the haunting, unfinished tune, was the same song his wife had once composed, but never completed. Each night afterward, he returned quietly, unseen, listening as Elena's fingers brought the past back to life. He told himself it was impossible, yet the song was real. It carried the same sadness, the same broken ending that his wife had left behind. Adrian listened with a mix of pain and wonder. Who was this young woman, and how could she play the song only his wife had ever known? Elena, unaware of his presence, continued to lose herself in the music. She believed no one noticed her, that her songs faded into the emptiness of the hall. But every note she played was pulling at the heart of the man in the shadows. For both of them, the piano was more than sound, it was a bridge across loneliness. Elena played to escape her silence, while Adrian listened to escape his grief. And though neither of them spoke a word to the other, a quiet connection had already begun, carried by the unfinished song that linked their lives in ways they had yet to discover. That night, as Elena finished her playing and gently closed the lid of the piano, Adrian sat unmoving in the dark. She walked out of the hall with her head bowed, her footsteps echoing faintly. Once she was gone, Adrian remained, staring at the piano with tears in his eyes. For years, he had thought the song was lost forever. Now, in the hands of a stranger, it lived again. And so, the lonely girl at the piano and the grieving man in the shadows continued their quiet routine, one playing, one listening, unaware that their lives were slowly being drawn together by the unfinished notes of a forgotten song. The old music hall was always quiet when Elena entered, and she liked it that way. She thought of it as her secret place, where the outside world could not disturb her. To her, the piano was like a friend who never judged, never left, and always waited patiently. That evening, after finishing her shift at the bookstore, she hurried through the cool night air, her coat wrapped tightly around her. The streets were dim, but she knew her path by heart. The music hall stood in silence, and when she pushed the heavy doors open, the smell of dust and old wood greeted her. She smiled faintly, as if she had returned home. She walked toward the stage and touched the piano gently, her fingers brushing across the keys. Sitting down, she let her hands fall into their natural rhythm. The first few notes echoed softly, spreading through the empty space. But the hall was not truly empty. At the far back, hidden in the shadows where the light did not reach, Adrian Hale sat motionless. He had been coming here for many nights now, always slipping in quietly after she began playing. The world knew him as a powerful man, one who rarely appeared in public, but here he was only a silent listener, almost afraid to breathe too loudly. His eyes stayed fixed on the young woman at the piano. Every detail caught him: the way her hair fell forward when she leaned closer to the keys, the way her shoulders relaxed when the melody deepened, and the way her eyes sometimes closed as if she had forgotten the world. But what captured him most was the music itself. That unfinished song. The very first time he heard her play it, his heart had stopped. He had not heard that tune for years, yet it was written deep into his memory. His wife, Clara, had composed it long ago, spending hours at her own piano, humming and smiling as she tried to perfect it. She never finished. Her sudden death had left the song incomplete, like a sentence cut in half. Adrian had carried that silence in his soul ever since. And now, this stranger, a young woman who should have no connection to Clara, was playing the exact same melody. It was impossible, and yet it was real. Adrian clenched his hands together, struggling against the flood of emotions. He wanted to stand up and demand answers. He wanted to ask her how she knew that song. But each time, something stopped him. Perhaps it was the raw honesty in her playing, or the way she seemed to play not for applause but for survival. She was not performing. She was speaking through the keys, just as Clara once did. So he stayed in the shadows, listening. Elena, lost in her own world, continued playing. Her heart had been heavy all day. Customers at the bookstore had been polite but distant, and when she returned to her empty apartment, the silence had felt unbearable. Here, though, in the hall, she could release everything she held inside. She let the sadness flow into the unfinished melody, as though the piano itself understood what she could never say aloud. At one point, she paused and looked up at the ceiling, sighing softly. She whispered to herself, "Why does this song never end? Why can't I find the right notes?" Adrian heard her words, though she thought no one was near. His chest tightened. Clara had once said the same thing: "I can never find the ending." He leaned back in his seat, his breath shaking. For years, he had avoided music altogether. He could not bear to hear the piano in his home, could not bear to remember the sound of Clara's laughter as she played. But here, against his will, the music had found him again. And though it hurt, it also gave him something he thought was lost forever: hope. The song ended softly. Elena let her hands fall from the keys and sat still for a long moment. Then, with a small, tired smile, she whispered, "Thank you," as if speaking to the piano itself. She rose, gathered her coat, and walked out of the hall. Adrian did not move until the door closed behind her. Only then did he step out from the shadows, his polished shoes echoing on the old wooden floor. Slowly, almost nervously, he approached the piano. He reached out, touching the keys just as she had, his fingers trembling. A memory rushed over him, Clara's hands guiding his, laughing when he missed a note, her voice teasing, "You have no rhythm, Adrian." He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he pressed a key. A single note rang out, sharp and lonely in the vast hall. He sat down, staring at the keys, but he could not play more. His heart was too heavy. Instead, he whispered into the silence, "Clara, is it you? Did you leave something behind for me?" The question floated unanswered in the air. But deep inside, Adrian knew he could not ignore this mystery. He could not keep hiding in the shadows forever. The girl's music was too real, too close, too much of a reflection of his lost past. He made a quiet decision then. The next time she came, he would not remain hidden. For now, though, he left the hall slowly, his steps unsteady. His mind was filled with questions, his heart torn between grief and a strange, fragile hope. And Elena, walking home alone under the night sky, had no idea that her music had already changed someone's life forever. Elena's life moved in quiet circles. She worked, returned home, and then went to the music hall. Most people in town did not even notice her. She was polite, gentle, and careful, but she was also invisible in the busy flow of the world. Yet at night, when her fingers touched the piano, she felt alive. The hall became her private universe. Every note she played carried pieces of her heart, the loneliness, the longing, and the small sparks of hope she tried to protect. That night was no different. She entered the hall, took her seat, and let the music guide her. The familiar unfinished melody came again, her hands moving as if they belonged to someone else. The tune had lived inside her for so long that she no longer questioned why it returned. It was like breathing. But in the shadows, Adrian was already there, his eyes locked on her. He had promised himself he would step forward, yet when she began to play, his courage dissolved. He could not bring himself to interrupt. Instead, he sat quietly, his chest aching at every note. The strange thing was how the music affected him now. At first, it had hurt him deeply, reminding him of Clara's absence. But with each night that passed, the pain began to soften. Listening to Elena play the song felt different. It was no longer just about loss. There was something new inside the melody, something gentle and healing. He realized the girl was not only playing Clara's tune. She was adding her own emotions into it. The sadness was there, yes, but also a fragile warmth, like a candle burning in the dark. That small flame reached him, and for the first time in years, Adrian felt less alone. Elena, of course, did not know he was there. She often played with her eyes closed, letting her feelings guide her fingers. But sometimes, she opened them and looked out at the empty seats. And every time, she felt something strange, like someone was listening. The hall was empty, yet her heart told her otherwise. One evening, after finishing the unfinished melody, she stayed longer on the piano bench. She rested her chin on her hand and spoke softly, almost as if to the hall itself. "Why do I always come back to this song?" she whispered. "It feels like it belongs to someone else, but it's mine too." Adrian's breath caught in the dark. His instinct told him to answer, but he remained silent. He could not yet reveal himself. He was not ready. Still, her words stayed with him as he left the hall that night. For years, he had lived behind walls, keeping the world out. But this young woman, without even knowing it, was breaking those walls with her music. The next evening, Elena's day at the bookstore was especially lonely. She had seen couples walking by hand in hand, friends laughing together, children tugging at their parents' sleeves. When she went home afterward, the silence of her apartment pressed too hard on her chest. She packed her things quickly and hurried back to the hall, almost running. When she sat at the piano, her fingers shook. But the moment the melody began, her body relaxed. The song welcomed her like an old friend. In the shadows, Adrian closed his eyes. He could feel her sadness in every note. He did not know her story, but he recognized her loneliness because it was the same as his own. The connection between them grew, though neither spoke nor even saw each other clearly. It was silent but strong, carried only by the music. At times, Elena felt it so strongly that she stopped playing and looked around, her heart beating fast. "Is someone there?" she asked once, her voice trembling. Adrian pressed himself deeper into the shadows, his hands clenched. He wanted to step forward, but fear held him back. What would he even say? That he was a billionaire who had been following her songs in secret? That her music had the power to reopen wounds and heal them at the same time? Instead, he stayed silent. Elena shook her head and laughed softly to herself. "I must be imagining things," she murmured, and began playing again. But deep inside, she knew it was not imagination. There was a presence in the hall, warm, steady, and unspoken. She did not feel afraid. In fact, she felt comforted. That night, when she finished, she stood and walked slowly toward the door. But before leaving, she turned back to the piano and said quietly, "Thank you for listening." The words startled Adrian. Did she know? No, she could not. She had not seen him. Yet those words pierced through his heart, and for a long moment he sat frozen in his seat. When the doors closed behind her, he whispered back into the empty hall, "And thank you for playing." It was the first time he had spoken aloud in the hall, and it felt like a promise. The silent connection between them was no longer just music. It was something deeper, something waiting to bring them face to face. The music hall was unusually quiet that evening. A soft wind moved through the cracks of the old building, carrying a low whistle that blended with the silence. Elena pushed open the heavy door as always, her steps light and careful. She had been restless the whole day. Something inside her heart told her that tonight would not be like the others. She settled at the piano, letting her fingers rest on the keys before pressing down gently. The first notes echoed warmly, filling the hall with a sound that always felt like home. She closed her eyes, and once again, the unfinished melody came. But this time, the feeling was stronger. She felt watched, not in a frightening way, but in a way that made her heart beat faster. She paused, glancing at the dark rows of seats. "Is someone there?" she whispered softly, her voice barely louder than the piano's fading sound. Adrian sat in the back, hidden by the shadows as he always was. But tonight, he could not keep still. Her question reached into his chest, breaking apart the fear that had held him for so long. He knew the silence between them could not last. He had lived in shadows long enough. Slowly, he rose to his feet. His tall figure emerged from the darkness, and his footsteps echoed as he walked down the aisle toward her. Elena gasped, standing quickly from the piano bench. She clutched her coat tightly around her shoulders, unsure whether to stay or run. The man approaching her looked serious, his face lined with a kind of sorrow she did not understand. His dark suit, though simple, carried a quiet power. His eyes were steady but heavy, as though carrying years of grief. "I'm sorry," Adrian said softly, stopping a few steps away from her. His voice was deep but gentle. "I didn't mean to frighten you." Elena swallowed hard. You've been here." He nodded slowly. "Yes. For many nights now." Her eyes widened. "Why? Why would you listen to me play?" Adrian's gaze dropped for a moment. He looked at the piano, then back at her. "Because of that song. The one you always play. It isn't just music to me. It's something. I thought I lost forever. Elena blinked, confused. I don't even know where it comes from. I've been playing it for years, but I've never seen it written anywhere. It just lives in me. Like it belongs to someone else. Adrian's chest tightened. His voice trembled slightly as he asked, "Do you know my wife's name?" "Clara Hale." Elena shook her head. "No, I don't know her." "Why?" Adrian took a slow breath. "Because she wrote that song. Or at least, she began to. She never finished it." His eyes softened with pain. "And yet you play it exactly as she did. Every note. Even the way it stops in the middle." Elena stared at him, stunned. She shook her head in disbelief. "That's impossible. I never met her. I've never even seen the music." "I believe you," Adrian said quietly. "That's why I needed to come forward tonight. I had to know how this was possible." For a long moment, the hall was silent, filled only with the weight of their words. Elena's heart raced. She looked at Adrian carefully now, noticing the sadness behind his strength. He did not look like a man searching for answers in anger. He looked like a man searching for a piece of his heart. Finally, she lowered her voice and asked, "Who are you?" "My name is Adrian Hale," he replied, almost reluctantly. Her eyes widened again. She had heard the name before everyone in town had. He was the man known for his wealth, for the empire he had built. But seeing him here, standing in the lonely hall, he did not seem like a powerful billionaire. He seemed like someone broken, someone clinging to music because it was all that remained of love. Elena's fear softened. She looked at the piano, then back at him. Maybe the song is not meant to belong to just one person," she whispered. "Maybe it's meant to find those who need it." Adrian stared at her, struck by the simplicity of her words. For years, he had thought of the song as his wife's unfinished legacy, locked away with her memory. Yet here was this young woman, carrying the same melody inside her as if it had been planted in her soul. He stepped closer to the piano and touched one of the keys. The soft note rang through the hall. "Would you play it again?" he asked gently. Elena hesitated, then sat back down on the bench. Her hands touched the keys, and the melody began to flow once more. Adrian stood near, listening not from the shadows this time but openly, his eyes fixed on her as though she were holding the key to something he had lost. The music wrapped around them, weaving the grief of the past and the loneliness of the present into a single thread. For the first time, both of them felt the weight of connection, not silent, not hidden, but real and alive. When the last note faded, Elena looked up at him with questioning eyes. Adrian exhaled slowly, his voice heavy but full of gratitude. "You don't know it," he said softly, "but you've been keeping her alive for me." Elena's throat tightened, her hands trembling slightly above the keys. She had never felt her music touch someone so deeply. And though she did not fully understand it, she felt something shift inside her that night. It was no longer just about escaping loneliness. It was about sharing it, and in that sharing, discovering something new. The next evening, Elena found herself walking with hesitation instead of her usual quick steps. She had promised herself she would return to the hall, but the memory of the man stepping out of the shadows lingered in her mind. Adrian Hale. A name she had only heard in news articles and quiet conversations in town. He was supposed to be untouchable, a man living behind high gates and high walls. Yet she had seen him vulnerable, standing before her with eyes full of grief. When she entered the hall, he was already there waiting, not hiding this time. He stood near the piano, his tall figure framed by the pale light from the windows. For a moment, Elena froze at the doorway, unsure if she should continue. Adrian gave her a small nod. "I was hoping you'd come back." Elena swallowed and slowly stepped inside. "I wasn't sure if I should." "Why not?" His voice was calm, but there was a quiet plea hidden in it. You, she said simply, unable to find better words. A faint smile touched his lips. And you're the one who carries a song no one else in the world should know. Perhaps that makes us equal. Her cheeks warmed, and she looked down at her hands. She did not know how to answer, so she let silence speak for her. Adrian, sensing her unease, gestured toward the piano. Would you play it again? He asked softly. Elena sat down, and soon the familiar melody filled the hall. Adrian closed his eyes, letting it wash over him. Each note felt like a step closer to something he had buried long ago. But when the song reached its familiar breaking point and stopped, he opened his eyes and moved closer. Elena, he said gently, using her name for the first time. There is something I want to show you. Something important. She looked up, startled. What is it? He hesitated, his voice almost trembling. The sheet music. Clara's unfinished notes. They've been sitting untouched in my home for years. And I think you should see them. Elena's breath caught. The idea of entering his world frightened her, yet curiosity pulled at her heart. She nodded slowly. All right. The following evening, Adrian sent a car for her. Elena almost refused, but her feet carried her inside, and soon she was on her way to the Hale estate. The gates were tall and heavy, opening slowly as the car approached. Beyond them stretched gardens that seemed endless, though they were quiet and still, as if no one had enjoyed them for a long time. The mansion itself stood like a giant, its walls tall, its windows grand. But when Elena stepped inside, she noticed something unexpected: silence. For all its beauty, the place felt lonely, like a house that had lost its laughter. Adrian met her at the entrance and guided her down a long hallway. He did not speak much, but his presence was steady, like a man walking through memories he could not escape. Finally, they reached a wide room filled with books and a grand piano shining in the corner. Adrian walked to a drawer and pulled out a folder, handling it with great care. He placed it on the piano and slowly opened it. Inside lay sheets of music, the notes handwritten, unfinished, scattered like thoughts that had stopped mid-sentence. Elena stepped closer, her eyes widening. She covered her mouth with her hand. It's the same, she whispered. It's exactly what I play. Adrian's gaze softened. I know. Her hands trembled as she reached out to touch the paper. The ink had faded with time, but the melody was clear. Every note matched the tune that had lived in her heart for years. She blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears. How is this possible? She asked, her voice breaking. I never saw this before. I never knew her. But I've been playing this song since I was a child. It came to me when she stopped, her throat tightening. Adrian leaned closer. When what? She lowered her head. When my mother died. I was 11. I remember sitting at the piano in our small apartment, and suddenly this melody came to me. It felt like a gift, like a voice telling me I wasn't alone. I've played it ever since. Adrian's heart ached as he listened. Clara had died years after Elena's mother, yet somehow the unfinished song had found its way into this girl's hands, into her heart. He could not explain it, but he felt Clara's presence in the room, watching them both. Elena, he said softly, maybe the song was never meant to belong only to one person. Maybe Clara left it behind, and somehow, it found its way to you when you needed it most. Elena wiped at her eyes, whispering, it feels like, it was waiting for me. Adrian nodded, his own voice thick with emotion. And perhaps it was waiting for both of us. You to carry it forward, and me to find it again. They stood in silence, the weight of truth settling between them. The unfinished melody was no longer just a song, it was a bridge across time, across grief, across two broken hearts. Elena looked at the grand piano in the room, then back at Adrian. Maybe, we should finish it? Adrian's eyes widened slightly. The thought terrified him, yet filled him with hope. Clara's song had always ended in silence, but perhaps now, with Elena's hands and his heart, the silence could be broken. He gave a slow nod. Yes. Together. And for the first time in years, the lonely halls of Adrian Hale's home prepared to hear music again. The grand piano stood waiting in the wide, silent room. Its polished surface reflected the faint glow of the chandelier above. For years, it had remained untouched, a reminder Adrian could never face. But now, standing beside Elena, he felt something different. The silence no longer felt like a prison. It felt like an invitation. Elena ran her hand lightly across the piano keys, her fingers trembling. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Adrian nodded slowly. "It was hers," he said, his voice almost breaking. "Clara played this piano every day. After she was gone, I could not bear to touch it. I thought if I did, the house would feel her absence even more." Elena looked at him softly. She could see the weight in his eyes, the years of grief he had carried alone. She pulled the bench forward gently and sat down. "Then maybe," she said quietly, "it's time to let it breathe again." For a long moment, Adrian stood frozen. But then, as if guided by something stronger than fear, he lowered himself onto the bench beside her. His tall frame sat stiffly, his hands resting uncertainly on his knees. Elena gave him a small smile. "Don't be nervous. Music doesn't ask for perfection. It only asks for honesty." Her words struck him deeply. He looked down at the piano and slowly lifted his hands. They hovered over the keys, uncertain, until Elena began the melody. The same haunting tune rose into the air, soft and tender, filling the large room. Adrian's hands trembled, but he pressed a note. Then another. Slowly, carefully, he followed her rhythm. The sound was uneven at first, but Elena kept playing steadily, guiding him without judgment. As the notes intertwined, something remarkable happened. The melody no longer sounded lonely. It was fuller, richer, two voices instead of one. Adrian felt a warmth in his chest, a gentle force pushing against the cold walls he had built for years. Elena closed her eyes, letting her emotions flow through her fingers. She played with honesty, carrying her own pain and her quiet hope. Beside her, Adrian began to lose his stiffness. He started to feel the music instead of fearing it. Each note was a memory of Clara, yes, but not a painful one. For the first time, those memories felt alive instead of broken. When the familiar unfinished point of the melody came, Elena paused. Her hands rested on the keys, and she turned slightly toward Adrian. "This is where it always stops," she whispered. Adrian swallowed hard. His heart pounded. "Yes," he said. "This is where Clara always paused. She never found the ending." Elena looked at the keys with quiet determination. "Then let's find it together." Her fingers pressed forward gently, adding a new line of notes. It was soft at first, uncertain, but carried a feeling of release. Adrian followed her lead, his deep notes grounding her lighter ones. The song stretched beyond its unfinished edge, flowing into new ground. The melody grew, blooming like a flower in spring. It rose and fell, carrying sadness but also hope. Adrian felt his chest tighten, his eyes burning with unshed tears. Each note felt like Clara's hand guiding his own, but also like Elena's heart reaching for him. Finally, the music resolved in a gentle, complete harmony. The last notes lingered in the air, vibrating softly before fading into silence. Neither of them moved. Elena's hands stayed on the keys, and Adrian's shoulders shook with emotion. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of everything they had poured into the song. Elena turned to him carefully. "I think that was the ending." Adrian pressed a hand to his eyes, tears slipping free. It was, he whispered. It was everything she wanted. And more. Elena touched the piano softly, her voice steady but gentle. Maybe she left it unfinished on purpose. So that one day, you could finish it with someone who also needed it. Adrian looked at her, his vision blurred by tears. For years he had lived in grief, believing Clara's song was a wound that would never close. Yet here it was whole, alive, and shared. Not a reminder of death, but a reminder of love that continued to move forward. He reached out, placing his hand gently over Elena's. "Thank you," he said, his voice breaking. "You've given me back something I thought was gone forever." Elena met his gaze, her own eyes shining. "And you've given me something too. For so long, I thought I played this song because I was alone. But now I know I was playing it because I was waiting for someone to hear it." The two of them sat in silence, their hands resting together on the piano. The house, once quiet with grief, now held a new sound, the echo of a finished melody, and the quiet birth of healing. From that night on, the grand piano was no longer silent. The rooms of Adrian's estate began to hear music again, sometimes filled with sorrow, sometimes with light. But always with the sound of two souls finding strength in each other. The unfinished song was no longer unfinished. It was a promise. The first rays of morning light entered through the tall windows of Adrian's estate, touching the polished piano with a soft glow. For years, the room had felt heavy, locked in shadows of grief. But now, with the memory of last night's music still fresh in the air, it felt different. It felt alive. Elena woke early, sitting by the window with a notebook in her hands. She was writing small lines of music, humming softly to herself. Though her life had always been marked by loneliness, for the first time she felt like her heart was no longer empty. Adrian entered quietly, holding 2 cups of tea. He paused at the doorway, watching her with a gentleness he hadn't felt in years. "You're awake early," he said softly. Elena smiled and closed her notebook. "I couldn't sleep. The melody kept playing in my head. I thought I should write it down before it slips away." He handed her the cup. "You're already preserving history," he said with a faint smile. "Clara's unfinished song, now it belongs to both of us." Elena looked at him carefully. "It belongs to the world now. Because music is never just for one person." Her words touched him deeply. For so long, Adrian had clung to the song as a private treasure, the last fragile memory of his wife. But Elena had shown him that holding on to grief alone would never heal him. Sharing it was the only way to let the pain turn into beauty. Later that week, Adrian made a decision. He invited a few close friends and trusted people to the estate. The grand piano was polished, and the sheet music was placed neatly on its stand. For the first time in many years, the house was filled with quiet anticipation, not silence. Elena felt nervous as she stood beside Adrian in the hall. "Are you sure about this?" she whispered. Adrian gave her a calm nod. "Yes. I've kept this song locked away for too long. It's time the world hears it. And I want them to hear it with you." The guests took their seats, unaware of the story hidden behind the melody. Elena sat at the piano, her heart racing, but Adrian sat beside her, steady and strong. Their hands touched briefly before the first note was played. The music began softly, like a whisper. Every note carried weight, every pause carried meaning. The guests leaned forward, enchanted by the haunting tune. When they reached the point that had always been unfinished, Elena's hands continued with the new ending, her heart guiding the music. Adrian followed, his deep notes steady as an anchor. The melody rose higher, more powerful than before, filling every corner of the hall. Some of the guests closed their eyes, some wiped away quiet tears. No one knew the full story, but everyone felt the emotion, the sadness, the love, the healing. When the last note faded, silence fell across the room. It was not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of hearts too moved to speak. And then, soft applause grew into strong clapping, echoing through the hall. Adrian's eyes were wet, but his heart felt lighter than it had in years. He turned to Elena, his voice low but full of gratitude. "We did it?" Elena smiled softly, her own eyes shining. "No. You did it. You let her song live again." In the days that followed, the story of the melody spread quietly. People spoke of the haunting yet healing song played at Adrian Hale's estate. Some said it carried sorrow, others said it carried hope. But everyone agreed it was unforgettable. Adrian began to look at life differently. For years, his world had been about wealth, power, and loss. Now, he saw life as something delicate, like music meant to be shared, not hidden. He spent more time outside, walking with Elena through the gardens, listening as she spoke about her dreams. Elena too felt her world changing. She was no longer just the lonely girl in the music hall. She had found someone who understood her silence, someone who heard her music not just with his ears, but with his heart. One evening, as the sun set in shades of gold, Adrian and Elena sat by the piano once more. The windows were open, letting the gentle evening air flow through. "Elena," Adrian said quietly, "do you know what this piano means to me now?" She tilted her head. "Tell me." "It used to be a reminder of loss. But now, it's a reminder of second chances. Of hope. Of you." Her heart softened at his words. She placed her hand gently on the keys, pressing one note. "Then let's keep filling it with music. Because hope never ends." Adrian smiled, and together they began to play again. Not Clara's song this time, but something new, fresh melodies that belonged to them both. That night, as the stars appeared one by one, the house no longer carried the weight of grief. Instead, it carried the gentle sound of music, of laughter, of healing hearts. Elena had found the connection she had always longed for. Adrian had found peace after years of sorrow. And together, through music, they had created something lasting. The unfinished song of a lost wife was no longer just a memory. It had become the foundation of a new beginning, one where love was not taken away by loss, but reborn through hope. And in that house, as long as the piano keys were touched, there would never be silence again.